So now we are continuing discussion on I hosted object, I host object, sorry, I host object. In previous video I discussed I hosted service. We have main two interfaces which are important to work to run background service. One is I hosted service and two interface, sorry I said services, so two means interface I am saying. So this I host interface and I hosted service, these two services interfaces, sorry I'm repeating the same thing. These two interfaces are important for to run the background, to run processing in background. So in last video I explained the I hosted service. This service, just I will briefly explain what it contains start async and stop async, these two methods. The main responsibility of start async method is in this interface, in this method we encapsulated what are the business requirement, what are the things which we need to run in background, those whole code which we have to return in the start async method. One thing we at the time I discussed, the start async method must return task immediately, otherwise the application which is hosted this service, now we will discuss who is hosting, what is host, but the application which is hosting this I hosted service will run sequentially. If we block that I hosted service, then what are the other hosted service which are available will not run. So the first requirement of I hosted service is it return quickly the task. Next requirement is we didn't call the avoid functionality, we didn't block the thread. These are main two things we have to consider when designing the I hosted service. I hosted service start async method. Okay, now we are discussing the I host object. The responsibility of the I host object is it is the hosting object. What it is hosting, based on that we have two types of hosting object. One is web host object and normally another is I host object. These are the two built in I hosted interfaces. I can say web host interface and I host interface. So we have two interfaces. One is web host and I host belonging to I hosted, and next is I hosted service. What it is hosting, based on that we have differentiate the two things, I host and I web host. I web host, it encapsulated, it is hosting multiple things, not multiple, mostly two things. One is I hosted service, next is a server, which server by default built in ASP.NET Core which hosted Kestrel server. Again, one point to note it, this Kestrel server also internally implemented the inherited from I hosted service. So finally I can say that all hosted objects encapsulated I hosted services. Okay, in that one I hosted service is Kestrel server. That Kestrel server, if any object which encapsulated Kestrel server as a hosted service, then it is considered as a iWeb host. That means that application will run as a web host application because it is internally hosting web, internally it is hosting server as well as a hosted service. If the host object which internally encapsulated web server, then it is considered as a web host object. Okay, now next thing is I host object. It, the responsibility of I host object is it doesn't encapsulated any web related things, services. That's why it is only encapsulated hosted service. Okay, so now we'll discuss on what are the methods which are available in iHost interfaces. iHosted I consider as it two types. One is iWebhost, next is iHost. Webhost actually encapsulated collection of iHosted service. Next is iHTTP server. These iHost service is responsible for encapsulating hosted service. This for encapsulating server. So the application purpose of this interface is to handle request and generate the response. So now by default we have Kestrel server, internally iWebhost object encapsulated Kestrel server. So it is listening the HTTP request particular port number. These are internally configuration, but in ASP.NET Core property.setting some file name is there, launch.setting there, whatever port we are specifying, to that port this Kestrel object is listening, and this Kestrel object internally encapsulated in iWebhost object. Got it? Suppose we have a requirement that our application will not take any HTTP request response object, just it need to run background services. Okay, now this is our application. It doesn't to this application no need to handle HTTP request, just it can process the background services. In those scenarios we are using the host object, iHost interface. Got it now? So two types of host objects. One is iWebhost object and iHost object. The requirement of your application handle HTTP request simultaneously running the background services. At the time we are using this iWebhost object, if requirement is only processing the background services, at the time we are using the host object. Okay, now we'll go to the implementation, what are the things which are available in host object, and finally I will go to the background service. Okay, one second. I will give the pseudocode for iHost object, just basic pseudocode. It will check what are the hosted service, and then it will run those hosted service continuously, synchronously, not parallelly but synchronously. Then finally call the, if application is web host, finally call the Kestrel server. So this is just basic pseudocode which is encapsulated in iHost object. iHost object contains start async method. In this start async method, I say the pseudocode is, first we have to retrieve the iHosted service, whatever. Note, I am giving the pseudocode which is present inside the start async method of iHost interface. First we are retrieving the what are the services, iHosted services, which are already registered to the through dependency injection. Okay, And after getting the hosted service for each, here you have to see service in a host service. You check here, we are running this one is synchronally. This service dot async, same cancel attend token whatever we are getting. Okay, otherwise configure await. You see that here this code is running the list of service one which is hosted service synchronously and continuously. That's why we already discussed whatever the iHosted service must return the task. Why we are saying the return quickly means control flow will come to this service quickly instead of waiting to the what are the tasks, what are the ISync method of the iHosted service, processing of implementation of the iHosted service start async method. Just it is written the task, and this task thread pool, some other thread of the thread pool will take the responsibility of this means start async method of iHosted service. But start async of iHosted object will get the control flow quickly. After running the task, the control flow will get no processing of this service B. After returning the task, no control flow will get. Okay. Now I just given the pseudocode of iHost object which encapsulated the all hosted services and calling these all iHosted services in sequentially. So we have to design our iHost service in such a manner that it return the task very quickly. Instead of processing all things by we are extracting the control flow. Just iHost service run by the other thread which is not run by the iHost object start async method. Okay, now after getting the start async, we have stop async method of stop async method of iHost object. What is the responsibility of this whenever we are closing our application? Well, I will explain what are the application lifetime scopes in later. So whenever application is shut down, we have the host object will call this stop async method. Internally in stop async method, it is calling all the iHosted services and cancelling the iHosted services means not cancelling, stopping that iHosted service. What are the hosted service encapsulated? Okay, note here one thing. How host object is stopping that iHosted service through cooperative cancellation by uh, by cooperative cancellation means the cancellation token internally iHosted service will call that through if cancellation token is requested. We'll explain details in these future classes related to how we have to cancel those, how we have to stop the iHosted service. Okay. Now, but okay. Okay, next thing I will explain. Next thing we need to go. I have completed the iHost object, and previous demo I completed the iHosted service, and I will just briefly explain final class that is background service. Okay. I have very limited time. The responsibility of the background services is it must inherit from iHosted service. Actually, why we needed this background service is if the person user who are inherited from the iHosted service class, he will forget to return quickly the task, or he will internally call the await method will make this iHosted service will block the control flow of the host object of iHost object. To avoid these two things, we make the end user better functionality by using this background service class. Okay. background service class we inherited from a hosted service and a disposal. To the end user, we have one abstract class, that is abstract is execute async cancellation token. To the end user, we are giving this abstract class. Who is calling this abstract class? By default, we are implementing start async of this iHosted service. This start async internally calling this execute async. So thing you need to consider, this is the some like a template design pattern. Template design pattern means we have one interface, we have one abstract class and general method. This general method calling this abstract class. This is the template method design pattern. This abstract method. This abstract method, to this abstract method, background who are inheriting the background class, suppose I have scheduler service which is inheriting the background class, must implement this abstract method. Okay, so now end user will not touch start async, stop async. Yeah, end user can override. We'll discuss those things when end user need to override and stop override. But from this scenario, background services is inherited from iHosted services and implementing the start async, stop async. In start async method, it is calling the execute abstract method. The responsibility of execute abstract method will be behavior will be written by the overriding class. Okay, so what exactly start async method is doing? Those two drawbacks, whatever end user will forget, suppose it is not returning the task immediately. Second is, it is sometimes if user is called the avoid. Those two responsibilities taken by the background abstract background class in the start async method. Okay, that's it. This is the main purpose. And yeah, if you need pseudocode, we'll quickly go through the speedily go through the pseudocode. Otherwise, this is the basic concept. I will check in document related to the pseudocode. Okay, yeah, just I will explain. Otherwise, we have start async. This background services cancellation token and creating the cancellation token, create link token source. By token means we have already whatever the cancellation token, to this token we are adding this token. After adding this token, we are calling this execute abstract method by sending this cancellation token. This execute method returning the task. We storing this task is a execute task. Okay, now we'll checking whether this task is completed. If execute task is completed, just return the start async method will complete it. Else what we have to do, we are creating the another task instead of waiting to complete, otherwise blocking will be happen. Here this is the main, here not we are not calling the avoid method, we are just creating the new task and returning this new start new. What it is doing, it is calling the, otherwise it is continue with executor. execute task dot continue. Otherwise we are returning this task start new, and here avoid this execute task. Here you understood that avoid we are calling it other thread, not this main thread, which is the thread of start async. This await is calling it by other thread of the task. Okay, means we are creating another state machine. This is handling the background running. Okay, that's it. Now conclusion, we completed iHost service, iHost object, background service,